Hi, everyone. My name is David Ng, and my co-organizer that I'm here with today is Alejandra Gaviria. We are both PhD students at the Social Justice Institute at the University of British Columbia, and we are delighted to be welcoming you all today at the 2022 Art Memory and Justice Symposium, Resilient Cartographies, Everyday Strategies of Social Justice that re-emerged during pandemic times. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Alejandra and I are virtually hosting this panel from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. A core part of our work as social justice scholars and the foundation of the symposium centers around decolonization. And with this land acknowledgement and affirmation that decolonization includes, but is not limited to, the return of stolen land, restitution, reparations, and justice for past and ongoing colonial subjugation. As students who work, live, and benefit from unceded territories, it is necessary for us to start our conversation recognizing and working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty.
Hello, everyone. The title of the third theme in our symposium is Decolonizing Senses of Justice and Normality in Pandemic Times. Despite social isolation, movements for justice have also been galvanized worldwide. During the pandemic, already existing inequalities and injustices of the capitalist world became even more evident in a resounding way. Therefore, the return to normality suggests a continuation of systemic oppressions and inequalities that existed prior and during COVID. In this theme, we hope to explore the social movements that have responded to these structural inequalities that were exacerbated during a time of a physical distancing. Movement, movements against racialized, gender, and sexual violence, movements against police brutality and state violence, movements to topple status and rename colonial places, demands for land back, and decolonization, living wage, and safe supply. It's our pleasure to introduce our moderator for third panel, Nikki Franco. Nikki Franco is an abolitionist, community organizer, writer, and facilitator of space for collective study. Seeking to disrupt the institutionalized bureaucratic frameworks of academia and transactional ways in which relationships exist under capitalism, her work experiments with truth telling, radical history and thought, and revolutionary imagination. She also curates educational and cultural programming that navigates the current urgency on global solidarity, environmental and ancestral preservation, and strategies on building emotional and intellectual capacities to dismantle system of oppression that inform and deform our current lives. She is the host of Getting to the Root of It with Venus Root, a podcast that leans into conversations with artists, theorists, and organizers. Welcome, Nikki.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you for the generous words.
Awesome. And now introducing our esteemed panel for panel 3 today, Jassi Murad from the group Astrolab de Mariam. She's beaming into us today from Cyprus. Thank you for joining us. So Astrolab de Mariam is a collective of individual voices that come together, creating an inter-supportive web of a community. Given that our existence is often endangered by predominant capitalist systems we have been born into that prioritize capital and corporate profit over human prosperity, we gather to counterbalance inequalities and redistribute privilege and wealth. We exist here to preserve the essence of our various identities, cultures, ancestries, stories, spiritualities, and art. We provide an open, inclusive, and endorsed platform of expression that defies borders and prejudice, aiming to decentralize global prerogative. Shay Cage has been an activist of 22 years with True Ruts. True Roots, community steward of the MN Artist Coalition, and founder and director of Catalyst Arts. Artistically, she is a performer, writer, and creator of new work. Her performance and work has taken her across the US to South Africa, England, France, the Netherlands, Croatia, Mali, and Canada. She is a co founder of Mama Mosaic Theatre for Women, a recipient of a regional Emmy and an Ivy Award, a McKnight Fellowship, and a Distinguished Fox TCG Fellowship. She's been named one of the leading artists of her generation by Insight, a change maker by Women's Press, and best solo performer by City Pages for her role as the pilot in Frank Theater's Grounded 15 Ivy, among other awards. Shay is an advocate for sex trafficking victims and the proud mother of two. We also wanted to mention, let me read Remy and Tonier's bios first. So Remy Hellstern currently works as the project manager of the Xinjiang Documentation Project, co-hosted at UBC and SFU. She recently completed a Master's of Public Policy and Global Affairs at UBC and focuses her research on socio-technical policy development and innovative ways to use new technologies to document human rights violations domestically and internationally. In her free time, she loves to embroider vintage denim jackets for her friends and family and often finds inspiration from the beautiful environment. With her is Andrew Brown, who currently works as a production assistant at Scanline Visual Effects, or VFX. He completed his second degree at LaSalle College, Vancouver, in digital film and media in 2021. Recently, he began producing and hosting The Scrumptious Sandwich Show, a YouTube series focused on exploring the history of sandwiches from around the world and how to make them. Andrew has partnered with other artists on a multitude of short films, both documentary and fiction, as well as web series, commercials, and music videos. In his spare time, he loves to enjoy his childhood love of animals while photographing them in their natural habitat. Tonye Aganaba is a Black African queer and non-binary multidisciplinary artist, musician, and community worker living on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. They were born in London, England, the belly of the beast and the stronghold of imperialism, colonialism, and racial capitalism, but proudly trace their ancestral line to the lands colonial known today as Nigeria, Itson and Ija speaking peoples, and Zimbabwe Shona speaking peoples. Tonye's organizing began through music as one of the co-founders of hashtag Ground Up, Guilt & Co.'s performance-based mutual aid initiative that has raised over $100,000 for grassroots campaigns and service-based organizations in the downtown East Side since its inception. Tonye is a proud member of the Defund 604 network and Cops Out of Schools, organizing in the pursuit of the abolition of police, prisons, and the end of state violence and repression. Tonye is also the community manager and youth engagement coordinator at Ethos Lab, a Black-led innovation academy co-creating a vibrant anti-racist community through the facilitation of arts-based learning and leadership development. I'm just going to also recognize, and Elul, sorry to confuse things, I'm just going to go back up and we wanted to reference the work of Les Thesis, who they offered a gesture as a part of the symposium. They're not on the panel today, but we wanted to recognize their work. Les Thesis is an interdisciplinary feminist collective formed in Valparaiso, a city along the Chilean coast. The interdisciplinary nature of the collective results in performances that are visual, sonic, and sensorial. In September 2020, Las Dices launched Juntos Abortamos, Together We Abort, in the frame of the day of the struggle for the decriminalization and legalization of abortion in Latin America and the Caribbean. The issue was particularly brought to the surface during the COVID-19 pandemic, with Chile, Colombia, and Argentina decriminalizing abortion. Juntos Abortamos is the piece of media art that Les Thesis has contributed to the symposium. Unfortunately, Les Thesis cannot join today. However, you can watch their piece and as well as all the other gestures in the symposium at www.resilientcartographies.com. So without further ado, we're going to pass it now to Nikki and to our wonderful panelists. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So I am hailing from Miami, probably a little bit warmer than where a lot of folks are at. So just want to bring some of that sunshine and warmth. And I'm really excited to get into this conversation and sort of just be able to share space and learn more from you all as artists and organizers and just like disruptors of the nonsense that we are being asked to return to, and not just return to, but return to with eagerness, right? And I wanted to start this conversation first off with Jasi and learning a little bit more about what is the sort of backdrop and the context in which your work sort of situates itself in terms of this sort of like returning to normalcy, right? Which for us, we know very clear what that actually means. But yeah, I want to pass it over to you, Jasi, and just invite you to share a little bit about your work.
Thank you so much. Yes, good day to everyone. I am Jassi Morad, and I am a third-year student at Girne American University in Cyprus. I'm currently studying contemporary dance and performing arts. And thank you, of course, to the organizers for this beautiful effort and to bring together and to start this conversation. In terms of the project I'm introducing today, and in relation to the old normal and the new normal, and where do we find ourselves and where do we want to go, this is where this project started. The Astrolab de Mariam as a collective, as an idea, was born during and after the first wave of the pandemic. The idea came from the need to mobilize and to counteract the current structures and systems and institutions of the world that offer no true support or stability to the majority of the global population. When the pandemic appeared, this need became ever more urgent, of course, and it became ever more clear when observing the varying degrees of destructivity at which this pandemic affected different groups of people within society. So we founded this organization and this initiative, my friend and I, and we both grew up in colonized Palestine. So this largely drove our initiative and our need to create a space where an active effort of decolonization was happening, and not only in sense of social justice and on the streets and politically, but also decolonizing the mind and decolonizing the human experience. And for us, this happens in stages, in a way, because so within the organization, we do many things, but among them, we generate media. And this media, the intention of generating this media is in a way opening the space for people who would not normally consider their voices kind of respectable or worthy of being a part of the discourse, because in many senses, the art world is an elitist structure, and it's kind of hard to enter and be heard within the arts world and within creating within the sphere of creation and within the sphere of public communication. So Astrolab de Mariam as an organization was named after a Syrian woman whose name is Mariam al-Astrolabi. I will read a quote now from on the naming of the organization that is also on our page. Mariam al-Ijiliya lived and practiced astronomy and engineering around the 10th century in Syria. Mariam was the one to develop the principles of the simple astrolabe into the complex astrolabe, which was first developed in ancient Greece, leading her to be known as Mariam al-Astrolabi. She is recognized by many as the creator of the most basic version of the modern-day GPS system, as the instrument she created is used to make astronomical measurements and navigation on a computer that tracks one's observation, location, time, and date. Sadly, she remains unrecognized by many biographies and Western historical transcriptions of the instrument's history and development. Realistically, this experience of dispossession and historical exclusion is not limited to Mariam. Over the course of history, countless women, and especially women of color, have been discredited of their work or contributions within any given professional field. This is due to the predominant patriarchal and white supremacist culture that is systemically enhanced by capitalist power structures that further keep it in place. Once this reality is realized, one can attempt to seek measures to deconstruct it. This is the agenda we as a collective community adopt. Furthermore, the Astrolab de Mariam will commit to creating a discourse to reconstruct in its place a reality that serves our sustainability. This agenda is what will carry us forward as a community and as a collective. So the beginning of the organization really started as a desire to create this space for, it started with women, and then it grew because my friend and I, who we founded it, we were both Palestinian women, but we were both now outside of Palestine. So this also brought to context that we are migrants in Europe, we are migrants in Western culture, and it's even harder to kind of establish our voices and allow our voices to be heard and to be respected in this context. And we realized also we are not alone. Through meeting people and through conversations and through creating connections with other practicing artists or other thinkers of many backgrounds. For example, within the organization as well, we make an effort to combine people from backgrounds of as wide a spectrum as possible. For example, we have people in our community with the background of psychology, with the background of small business management, social organization, arts of different mediums, economics, science. My co-founder, my friend who's also my co-founder, she is in the field of politics and international law. And she is also currently a refugee in France, which also drove the awareness for the true need to provide also information for people like her in Europe who are seeking stability and seeking support and who have to navigate this system that is extremely confusing, and it's created this way to prevent people from entering and integrating into a very Eurocentric society. And yes, but we also noticed that, well, as we were evaluating not just who are we creating this space for, but also who do we want to be involved, we realized that we want it to be inclusive as possible, in the sense that, yes, we are minorities in Europe, and yes, we are disprivileged in many ways, and we are creating this space to support other people who are disprivileged by the system, but we don't want to exclude any group of people from being a part of our community, because we believe that the process of decolonization has to truly happen from a mutual understanding that this system is unsustainable for everyone, not just for the people disprivileged by the system, but also for the people who are privileged by the system. Yes. So if we hope to decolonize our minds and our bodies and our realities, we must first address the colonized present. And I will give some examples for that, because personally, as an artist, I truly seek, and I'm coming into the process of creating a more optimistic art, because within my personal artistic process, I'm empowered by seeing art that is imaginative, art that is empowering, art that is reflecting the reality that I would like to see. And but I also, while entering my artistic process, my artistic journey, which in many ways I was kind of blocked from due to my context and my culture and many limitations, I realized that I had a tendency to kind of reflect my reality, and sometimes that can be very somehow depressing and not very optimistic somehow. So there's also this balance and need to acknowledge the current colonization in order to arrive then at the process of decolonization and reconstructing in its place what it is that we would like to see. So I'm now beaming some images that this image was directed and edited by the co-founder Asil, and there are many images that are directly political, and they all arose from just kind of casual conversations of analyzing, criticizing, understanding, deconstructing what is the current positionality that we find ourselves within as individuals, and how do we, yes, and how are we reacting to that? Here, I think there's a video that will not stream. Okay. Maybe I will stream the videos all together at the end if there's some time. So I talked a bit about the decolonization process and that through collective practices. And what are these collective practices that we're aiming to bring as a community? As I briefly mentioned, that I come from a culture that's not very respectful of the practice of artistic expression and the investment in this in each person, in the sense that I truly believe that art can be very deeply healing and also very richly communicative and influential on a social level, and also on a personal level. And this also has to do with, to a certain extent, our creation process. Like every project that we create, it is about the media that is produced in the end, and it is about what is communicated through this project to the general public, but it's also largely about the process of creation itself and the transformative process within the process of creation itself, and how this affects the individuals involved. Because usually we only, the community it's an open space, so everyone can create whatever form of medium that they feel drawn to or feel expressive within, and we also intend to not censor the content that is created, and really, and I think that the material that we produce and its quality comes truly from the individuals that choose to be engaged within this community in the first place. And that is how, by building a community with like-minded people, like-minded intentions within this world, there's eventually, there's no need to censor any content, and there's no need to anyone can create with whatever perspective that they feel that they want to express. But also, I feel that it's important to I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. So these collective practices are either ones that we approach people with or that we are approached with by people in the community. So the community is created to kind of be a resource for people, kind of be a platform where they can be exposed, where they can also find allies, find collaborators, find people who would like to jump on their train. Sorry, I didn't mention these. So yes, this is Suleiman. He's also a collaborator. This is MMA. He's from Japan. I will stream a video of his at the end. And these are all in relation to commentary on situations and experiences that have largely affected the individuals and that need to be brought to light. So at the moment, the project is in the incubation period, and we are mostly on established on our virtual platform, which is Instagram. In the future, we hope to establish a cultural center that will be the ground base of these projects and a resource for people in and outside of the center itself to make their ideas a reality. Because many of us have found that in order to find professional opportunities in our field, we've had to bargain with our fundamental principles and dignity. And thus, we are taking the initiative to build a space where we can constructively be represented by ourselves. And we also aim to be a referenceable source for information and resources that concern our identities and histories, to take back power from the few wealthy entities that control today's economy and sustain ourselves and our authentic identity. So we as a collective, we are born out of the necessity to transcend the racialized, gendered, and capitalist violence that we have been victims of for too long, by creating new opportunities for ourselves within our context. We create opportunities for others. I will share my screen and stream some of these videos, short videos that are not streaming on this platform. Okay. This was a video created. This was a video created by myself and Asil Addik, the co-founder. And this next one is a teaser of a performance That is a commentary on indoctrination, educational systematization, yes, the structure. So I would like to end with a call to unite, to create allies, to yes, to broaden our horizons, and yes, thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, I want to see the rest of the performance. I'm like, okay, teaser. But yes, thank you. That was so lovely. I feel so inspired. I desperately want to learn more. I'm excited for us to get into like the juicy back and forth exchange, because I know there's so many artists in the space. I know there's some love happening in the chat. So thank you, Jassy. Beautiful work. Some really, really important considerations for us as we get into our conversation and as we move through this sort of conjuncture, right? This moment in history. I want to transition over to the work of Remy and Andrew with Sowing Seeds of Discontent, and similarly kind of posing the question to you all, kind of where you find yourselves in your work and sort of the time, place, and conditions of this moment and how it's impacting the work that you all do.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. It was really inspiring to see that work, and we're really honored to be here with the rest of the panelists, but also for the moderator and the organization team, because there's a lot of work that went into this. So really briefly, my name's Remy. My pronouns are she, her, and this is my partner and co-creator,
Andrew Brown. Pronouns are he, him. Yeah.
So we recently created a documentary short called Sowing Seeds of Discontent. And very briefly, it is questioning and looking at protest art that's used around the world, but specifically how textile work has been used as a form of protest art. So it's dual layer, as we use documentary filmmaking, guerrilla style, as an example of protest art, but simultaneously creating a piece of protest art while we explore some of the historical movements that have taken place. Embroidery has always been something that's very close to my heart. I started it maybe about 5 years ago. My father was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and I found joy in creating something beautiful from nothing, or something that was forgotten. And I found it as a way to manufacture joy when joy wasn't always around me, or the world felt particularly bleak. I could create my own version of it in whatever medium I wanted. I just needed a textile to do that. And I kind of attribute that to growing up and moving around a lot. I saw a lot of really amazing women use textile art as a form of survival, just to, have money to feed their family, but also as a form of resistance in and of itself. I think in a lot of ways, we have downplayed the importance of textile work as a craft or as a woman's art. And it's really so much more than that. There's so much skill and talent that goes into producing these. And I think that can often be overlooked when we have a society that emphasizes automated production of materials and fast fashion. And so I think that it's really amazing what can come from being produced by someone. And I think a really good example that we touch on in the documentary that we're not going to be able to touch on here, but I think is really symbolic of it is arpilleras, which were used during Pinochet's Chile. Women would use arpilleras, but essentially they would be called like the people's newspaper. And it was a way to keep track of what was happening in the community and communicate if individuals were missing or if they passed away when it wasn't readily available. And women would come together and produce these, and it would be a way to create a resistance or create a sense of community where it may not always feel like it's there. And I don't think we get to touch on the depth of that, because when there's darkness and there's times, you know, with the pandemic, for example, where we do feel isolated, we have to find and create our own communities when they're not always there. So this documentary really explores that and kind of questions how this has been used in the past. And for this presentation, the way that we were thinking of breaking it up is Andrew will talk a little bit about the history of guerrilla filmmaking with documentaries and how that has come about as a form of protest in and of itself. And then in the back half, I'm going to share some of this amazing work that we've seen from other women and groups around the world and touch on why this work is so inspirational and important. So with that, I'll pass it on to Andrew.
Okay, yes, I will be touching on some of the documentary aspects of our project here. And I gotta say, when Remy brought me this idea of documenting a live exhibit with embroidery and as a protest piece, it really blew me away. My mother is an amazing seamstress, and she taught me how to do some basic sewing things and stuff like that, but I would have never thought to use a medium like this as a means of protest or a means to speak out. But it just goes to show how resilient people are and how people will find a way to get their message out, no matter what circumstances or issues they are put in or anything. My background personally, I work a lot in feature film, in short film, more fiction, but I have also worked as a part of some documentary projects, but they all usually have a bigger budget and it's inherently a very collaborative media. There's usually a lot of people involved. For this one, we didn't exactly have that at the moment. So I took some tips actually from one of my own favorite directors, Robert Rodriguez. His debut film he made for under $7,000, which for a feature is absolutely unheard of. But his strategy was he had no crew. He was the whole entire crew. He did absolutely everything. And I did have some help on the sound design end from some great friends of mine. But outside of that, I was the entire crew for this. I shot it, I edited it, I was the lighting, I was everything. So it was a challenge, but it also helped, I think, the message of this in many ways, because it felt very personal and it felt very on the ground and hands on. And I think if there had been more setup and more people involved in everything, it may have felt a little bit too staged and it wouldn't have come off exactly right for this piece. So I think it actually ended up working for the benefit here. As far as documentary in general, it has, I think, a great history of being able to shine a light onto voices that historically have not been able to speak in the mainstream media. A personal example that I was going to bring up here was the documentary film Paris is Burning, which was about the trans community in New York in the 1980s. And the popularity of it, it took off at the time, and it spoke to a narrative and a group of people and shined a spotlight on some narratives that have never been spoken before, especially at that time. And another one, especially as a means of protest, is another documentary that I really thought was super powerful. It's called Whose Streets? And it is a documentary about the aftermath of the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri by the police officers, and kind of the fallout of it at the time. And at the time, we actually both lived in Missouri, so we saw some of this fallout occur and everything like that. But you don't necessarily know if the global scene can see it or they really know what's happening here. But with this documentary now, it is documented from these people's perspective, like what really was happening in these communities on the ground. And I think that that's just an incredible thing. But with that, it has to be acknowledged that still historically, even documentary, even though they are typically lower budget, it's video equipment, video rental, all of this type of stuff is very money intensive. So it is usually, there's a barrier to entry, historically speaking, there has been. But one of the incredible things I think is we all now have an incredibly small and super non-cumbersome video device that we all have that we can begin to document our own reality. So in a sense, we all are documentarians and are being able to document our reality. And from that, with protesting and essentially this returning to normal, we've seen since COVID many different things on a global scale with social media and people on the ground being able to document, the wake of George Floyd's killing. Even right now with what's happening in Ukraine and everything, we are seeing videos on the ground from people's cell phones that they are taking and experiencing a lot of these stuff on like social media, at least from my perspective, I think. And a lot of people my age are seeing these things happening on the ground. And it's really, you have to like willfully ignore it in many ways. Like there is so much obvious example, video evidence of these things happening. So saying that you want to return to normal, and it's just like it's inherently saying that if everything was all good before, when in reality, if there is so much change coming, why not try to change everything and make it more equitable across the board? I think just in closing on my aspects of this, one of the other things I wanted to mention with the documentary piece, it does have the potential to be exploitative, and every artistic piece has the potential to, as the documentarian, the potential to insert too much of my voice into this when that wasn't necessary. To circle back around to the Paris is Burning example, there has been a lot of controversy that came out after that the documentarian who made this, it made her whole career. She blew up. She made multiple documentaries and features and everything, and it really set her off, created her whole career and everything. But some of the people who were subjects of it didn't get compensated or anything like that, and were left relatively in the same spot that they were before, and have come out since and said that this documentary didn't really do anything for them specifically. So that's something very important, I think, as the dual-edged sword of being the only person who was speaking from the documentary's perspective, that it could have been too easy to insert too much of my voice into this, whether it be willfully or accidentally or for whatever reason. So I just wanted to make sure that when creating this, that I created it as a conduit, and I was just here to represent my fellow artist and document her message and be a conduit to be able to get that out to people and share it. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it right back and wrap this up.
Thank you for that. And I think just kind of going off of his point as well, we have to look historically at the medium of textile work and who gets supported and who gets uplifted and whose artwork is seen as something that's worth putting forward. And it's not always representative of talent. In fact, it's very rarely representative of talent. It's often people who look like Andrew and I whose work gets put forward first, because that is the system that we live in, that is inherently supportive of white privilege and white supremacy. And so one of the reasons we really wanted to look into this piece and break into it is see how women in general have used this, because this is kind of collectively what we've found, that this is not unique to one area of the world or one group of people. It's a form of resistance that's happening every day and is actually a fairly accessible one as well, because you don't really need that much. One of the cool things about this project that Andrew mentioned, not only was it done on like a shoestring budget, but everything was recycled that we used to actually make this embroidery piece. So we didn't even have to spend any money on materials. So that's kind of an interesting way that this medium can kind of break some of maybe the class barriers that most individuals have when it comes to trying to break into art. Most of us know here paint isn't the cheapest product available, or paintbrushes or these kinds of things. So that was an interesting one. And then in the back half of this presentation, we just want to celebrate some really amazing artists out there. So I'm going to touch on 3 really cool artists. We're going to put the slides forward. Yeah, okay, great. So this first piece right here is called I Stand With Women and Cis Women Embroidery. And it's from a trans artist based out of Quebec, Canada. And one of the things I found really unique about this piece, the artist has an interesting history. So she is an activist for transgender rights and specifically talks about trans history and trans feminism. And I think when we think about waves of feminism, it has been very dominated by white women. And with, the rise of intersectional feminism, we're still trying to create a more equitable space within that lens and within that framework. And I think that there needs to be room for conversations around who is seen as the dominant group. And I think oftentimes when we hear the terminology of woman or who is a woman, too often do we associate it with cisgendered women. And that creates a very small category and a very small group of people that is not representative of women as a whole. And so I liked that this challenged some of the assumptions, and it kind of flipped it where we have to kind of address the personal biases that we may hold when we hear these terminologies and these phrases. And, very rarely do we consider cisgendered women to be outside of the norm. And so I thought this was a really interesting way to flip it. And this artist also makes a lot of cartoons as well, which goes to show that, there's multiple different mediums to express how you're feeling in these kinds of ways. And then the next piece is called Ain't No Mountain High Enough. And this is from the Yarn Mission, which is a collective formed by a group of women outside of Ferguson, Missouri, and they're knitting for Black liberation. And so kind of as we touched on before in the national spotlight was the murder of George Floyd, or of Michael Brown, pardon me. And the wider community is looking at how police violence has impacted communities all over America, but specifically Black Americans. And what's interesting about this piece is her background. The founder of this is actually a professor in criminology. So she looks at kind of these systems of oppression. And this particular one, neck sleeve, the inspiration for this was having to watch individuals in her community be pepper sprayed. And so you think about the shield that you would need to protect yourself against that. And that's a really chilling thing to think about. And it's just something that all communities shouldn't have to face, but to see it so overtly like this, I think shows the need that we need to draw attention and focus to this. And so their mission in the Yarn Mission is to promote action and change to eradicate racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression. And the 3 key tenets of this movement is pro-Black, pro-rebellion, and pro-community, which is fundamental to their movement and mission. And I wanted to leave this particular piece with a quote from the founder of it, that it's scary because police will come after you no matter how organized or important the work that is being done is. And knitting offers a little relaxation and relief. It shows that we can come together in other ways and in places to make everyone feel a little bit safer. So again, we're kind of coming back to this idea that we use mediums as a form of joy and as a form of relief, because you can't allow yourself to be consumed with darkness all the time, because we need joy and we need hope to move forward in movements. And then lastly, this was a piece we added in more recently, given everything that has been happening with Ukraine. This is a Belarusian artist, and she's currently based out of Prague. And her form of protest art is cross stitch, which is a little bit different from embroidery, but it's still a textile work. And it arose as a form of protest against the re-election of the Belarusian leader of 26 years, Lukashenko. And she is currently living outside of Belarus in Prague, but she uses embroidery to show support for the growing democratic movement in the country. And she had a quote that I thought was particularly powerful for this piece as well, and just generally everything we've been talking about in this symposium thus far, is that all Belarusian embroidery, whether traditional clothes, tablecloths, or kitchen towels, uses symbols. You can guess the age, the gender, the social status, and the regional origins of the customer or the art using this encoded language. For me, this represents the history of the Belarusian people written in embroidery. The red thread also traditionally serves as a talisman to ward against evil spirits. So these kinds of projects are so unique and so interesting fundamentally because there's so much more than just what we see on the surface, that, you know, these beautiful pictures, they really support deeper messages and deeper movements. And that's really what we tried to break into and kind of start to talk about in the documentary short that we made. So thank you so much for your time, everyone. That's all we have for you. And we really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Remy. Thank you, Andrew. You know, just hearing y'all like make and weave in all of these like tapestries of like world building and like art as a conduit for imagining alternatives and what's possible, especially in times of trauma, be it displacement, be it war, be it state-sanctioned violence, and all of the things. So there's so many, I mean, just thinking like Jossie of your work that seems so connected to this, but is also situated in such particular contexts and in geographical differences, right? But there's so much that is kind of just like existing in conversation with each other. And without further ado, want to bring it to Shay to share a little bit about your work, bring it to the United States context. I know where some of us are at, I am, and also the work of Moment of Silence and sort of what you all are up to there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so blessed. I in my practice, I really ask on the universal spirit to kind of lead me in community. And that often brings me to places and spaces that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten to on my own. So yeah, I think sometimes it's really easy to be isolated, to have this feeling of isolation that, you know, you're the only one or there's a small group of us. And so this today has been really affirmative so far from the other panelists, and also just the work that is being done here as we look at the resiliency of our legacies, of our heart, sweat, bone-breaking work and labor around lifting up the possibilities. And so my work lies right in the cusp of that, very ritual-based work. And I was raised in the rural South, so I come from rituals. I come from a community resistance. I come from revolutionaries that set us literally around their feet at night and told stories, you know, so, and also dreamed, you know, like, so the dreams are very present. And that seeped into the core of my being, the same way that our ancestors seep into the trees that are around us and the leaves that are falling. And we think, the kids are like, oh, these leaves are dead. And it's like, they're still living, honey, because they carry truths. They've seen more than we have seen. And so just trying to keep the larger reality present is something that I've been really immersed in. Specifically, there's so much. So I'm here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, half of the Twin Cities, the city where Brother George Floyd's life was taken by Derek Chauvin in 2020 on May 25th, a knee held to his neck, witnessing him call out for mama, witnessing a community cry for help, seeing what it feels like for people to feel disabled. Also in a place where there's an incredible amount of resources, and this part of the United States, it's heavily funded, yet the disparities are just crippling, and I mean across the board, from housing to unemployment, and so I think, people keep asking, like, why did it happen? Like, why did this moment happen? And I think it's less about the why and just the fact that it is, and that it is in a legacy of continuum as well. And so how do we break the cycle, right? How do we break all of these cycles? And I think, hearing about the embroidery and also hearing our community being a part of very neighborhood-based efforts, I've been very privileged to work on a national level and travel to other cities and engage in, creative placemaking, where a lot of our focus is not necessarily on people that call themselves artists or people that know, quote unquote, we know what we're doing, but more so like, young girl over there, your community is watching you. How can we pull you up in here and see what you have to say? And then she's like, give me that piece of chalk. And she creates a masterpiece on the concrete. And we realize that we don't need to, we do and we don't. We don't need to spend years and years looking for these funds or resources for this grant when we can just give that chalk to that little girl or give this pen to this young man, and my dog, I knew it was just a matter of time. I've been doing everything to silence the dog, but I think it must be the mailman. So apologies in advance. See, the ritual, you can organize as much as you want, but you can't control all of the parts. My heart is overflowing. And in some ways, when I was invited, I really have been sitting and praying on like what parts to showcase. A Moment of Silence is an anthology that we created in the heart of the pandemic. One of the reasons was because we felt very alone. As Black artists here in Minnesota, there's less than 6% of us here. Yet we're incredibly active. And those of us that consider ourselves activists and revolutionaries, we're out in the community, we're moving and we're, trying to put the pieces together. But at the same time, in a pandemic, when we're all shut into our homes and et cetera. And so it spoke to the moment, but it also spoke to a larger need, which is our invisibility. How do we, and we're not invisible to ourselves. So how do we continuously break down these invisible, boundaries that keep us, at a distance? It pulled together over 50 Black artists across the spectrum. The common denominator is we all live here in Minnesota now, but many are from other parts of the world. And our situations brought us here. So there's refugees, there's immigrants, there's youth that aren't a part of the quote unquote system. There's folks that have been in the prison system and have come out and I've written their ways out of jail. There's mamas. I'm gonna just grab the dog. Why don't I? I'm gonna keep talking too. There's mamas and there's youth. Can you say hi to the people, Luna? Say hi. And there's elders too, you know, and I just think it was a lot of intention with the anthology that we put out. We didn't want to wait on pitching it, you know, to a publisher and 2-3 years later it coming out. We wanted to make it incredibly accessible. So we decided to put it online. I partnered with the Playwright Center, and it was an idea that I had. I was like, I know that we are grieving, and I know that we have something to say in this moment. And, you know, we're being called by the press, you know, you know, every news. I mean, there were so many, you know, news reporters that really kind of descended upon our city after so it felt very suffocating, actually. And many of us spoke to the news, but we also, there's times that we decided not to. And so in many ways, it was a gift to ourselves, and a balm, if you will. And so before we put it online, we actually just shared it with each other for quite a long time. I called up the Playwright Center. It's one of the largest playwright centers in the United States, and they really support artists. And I told them the idea. I was like, it's got to move out fast. You know, I was just really clear. And then I did what I usually do in my organizing work, was just call on people that I consider are smarter and, you know, and yeah, just smarter than me. You know, I try to surround myself with people that we can learn from, and they're not always older than me. And so I was like, hey, there's a pool of us. How do we get this into the world? Who are we missing? How do we curate this? You know, so it was very much a curation, a community curation, and also without, I think, some of the ordinary, is this person good enough to be in this anthology because Grey Wolf Press or, you know, whatever publisher has decided so. We decided so because either they're a steward in the community, there's somebody that has a voice that hasn't been lifted up lately, they continue to be marginalized, or just somebody that has something to say. So we have published writers, and then we have non-published ones. And I get so emotional because we're reminded that we are incredible if we just, you know, we put our heads together. So a moment of silence is our remembrance of who we are in this moment, but also who we are beyond this moment. So this second part is, I just really wanted to share the poem. So I decided I didn't want to have a lot of visuals and etc. I'm a filmmaker, I'm a theater artist, I'm a curator in community, I'm a gardener, you know, and so all of the elements come together, usually around art as upliftment. And I just wanted to strip it down to the bareness, essence of the words, because as I'm trying to raise these young Black men and remind them of their worth, at a time when they continuously see young men that look like them gunned down in the streets. And I could, you know, we have to explain, you know, and we have to talk through it. And we also have to not live in a space of defeat. We have to find the joy and the resilience. But how do we do that? And I just, I was on another panel recently and I said, well, how do we do it? We retain our rituals, our herbs, our songs, our laughter. We garden, even in the house, and 20 below degrees in Minnesota. It's the struggle is real here, particularly for Black and brown bodies, Indigenous folks. We have heated arguments and debates, and then we laugh afterwards. We have long hours of cooking together. And we just imagine. We imagine the world beyond us. We make films, we make theater, we make poems, we paint on stones, we gather our neighbors around and we hold anti-racism sessions, dream cycles. We make banners, we put them up in our own houses, on our fences. We give them to others who really need to put them up. We pool our resources when there are none. And we don't sit around waiting. But we get tired. We do get tired, and exhaustion is also real. So, we wipe each other's sweat, and we rock each other. We babysit each other's children. We pick up books and we read June Jordan together. We figure out how they did it, and we know that we can do it too. So I just wanted to read a few pieces, if that's okay with you. The first one is very short. I'm sorry. Before I read the pieces, I want to say one thing that is very important. As we come together in community, because particularly around the death of Brother George Floyd and in the creation of living memorials, we have, actual memorials that are still present, and we feed them with flowers and presents. We visit them daily, we shovel the snow, and etc. I think it's important. It's one of the things that have emerged is realizing that we all have very different narratives, right? And we hold trauma differently as well. And that's really real. When we try to come together and we build something, we have to acknowledge that, as opposed to saying, well, we're all in pain. We're all in different types of pain. And we're also at different parts of the journey. So before I create a film, before I create a poem, before I even create this anthology, we actually have to sit down and figure out, what are our core values? What are our principles? What practice are you bringing to the table? How can I honor that? And how can you honor mine? And it's not always easy. And so sometimes that affects the timeline. The moment of silence came together in less than 2 months. And it's, which is unheard of. I mean, it was just the fun, we found resources. We paid every single artist somehow. And we went through edits. We had copy editor. We brought on the right people. And we didn't delay, but I think it's because we took the time to establish a foundation, a shared foundation, and what this partnership is. So I'm going to just read, let's see. The first one is by Alex Pate, and it's just a quote, but it's so perfect. It says, the time has come and gone. You must now learn to love us better than you yourself, better than your own self, or, and there's a ... I'm going to read again. Time has come and gone. You must now learn to love us better than your own self, or ... The second one is by Ty Coleman. Both Alex and Ty are professors at the University of Minnesota, but they also do a lot of work in community. Ty is a mother as well. It's titled, What? Words are so important now, as words are always so important, even when there seems to be no real words. And then this one, I was going to read the foreword to the anthology because it's so fitting. It really talks about how, again, we as Black and brown people sustain in this place of 10,000 lakes, how we worship the water and we go to it, and we make practice in the mud and the dirt. And we allow ourselves to cry when we need to, without embarrassment or apology. And then we also run in the rain. It's raining and it's cold, but we're going to run in it, and we're going to go sit in the snow. And And we know we're not just dreaming without belief that a new day is coming, because we are impacting that new day. We're literally figuring out new ways of safety in our community. We're approaching policy in very complex ways. We are unabashedly stepping into brave space and calling out the powers that be with data. We're working with people that understand data and saying, okay, how can we put the numbers to this so that it's not like, oh, here they are again, arguing, saying that they're underfunded. No, we see the stats for the last 10 years and then the last 3 years. And oh, you're not even funding the people, our rural brothers and sisters. And look at our disabled brothers and sisters, our LGBT, so it's really getting smarter about the way that we organize. In this piece by Michael Kleber Diggs, the energy of it really represents the vibe that holds a lot of our activism and our dreaming. It's titled, "We Are Together in a Lush Place." The vision, we as a variation on us, we as the subject. We are, I'm sorry. If I was in the South, they would say, the devil is trying to get me, trying to take away my voice. But I think, I'm sorry. I think that we've lost a lot of ancestors, and they really show up and they move through my work. And they remind me when I say yes to a panel, or yes to moderating, or yes to creating an anthology or a documentary film on healing and wellness, that that there's no time for laziness, to always stay present, that I'm not in control and I'm just a vessel. So I've been reminded. Thank you, Ashe. Michael Kleber's piece, the vision, we as a variation on us, we are as the subject, we are. We exist, are as the verb, the action. We are together again, reunited. We are together in a lush place. We are together in a lush place celebrating. We are together in a lush place celebrating and loving each other, taking care of each other, healing. We are together in a lush place celebrating and loving each other, taking care of each other, healing. Our lush place is vast and verdant. We have crops we planted and cultivated. We make our own bread and food. We eat together in community. We make juice and tea and beer and wine. We have another garden too, flowers and trees, herbs, and that herb, a place where we make beautiful things and medicine. We have wise women and witches, astrologers and griots, poets, musicians, storytellers, historians. We make music, we dance, we sing. You know why we sing. It's a variation on why we've always had song. This time we sing because we're happy. We're singing because we're free. His eye is on the thrush. We know she watches us. By morning, by day, we work, we sweat, we plant and tend, we water and weed, we build houses and buildings and schools, grand schools. We make parks and places to play. We build a few roads, we build a few bridges. We bring in clean water and power. We bring waste out of the way. We gather what we will ripen off the vine. We cook together and eat together. We bring out the old recipes, the oldest recipes. We create new dishes. We clean up together. We recycle what can be recycled. We compost. We use everything we can. We waste almost nothing. We are stewards, taking care of Mother Earth and each other. In the afternoon, when the sun is high in the sky, we seek shelter. Some of us go to school, some of us teach, others retreat to their homes in our same verdant place. We read, we rest, we meditate, we write songs or poems or novels or plays. We write our history, we rewrite it, we tell it right. We rest and touch our beloveds with intention. We rub sore arms and legs, sore backs and chests and necks. We work our way down to where we curve and protrude to the center of our pleasure. We love each other. I'm going to stop there because I think it's my time, but I have so much more. And we are in the process. I wanted to actually close with a piece that I wrote that's called Run, but it's okay. I think that I love this space that's being cultivated. And I think that as a follow-up, I will put in the chat some of the information on where you can find some of the written works. Michael's piece goes on and on. Just so you know, there's some pieces that we luxuriate like for pages. And it's funny because we're often told, oh, it's too long, Shay, it's too long. My piece is like 3 pages. And then there's pieces like that are 3 lines. So I'm just touched. I'm touched by how we come together in resiliency and how we stay healthy in this work. And we keep saying to ourselves and others that we are not going anywhere. So, Ashe, I will surrender the mic.
Ooh. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know there's so much love going around. I'm feeling it too. You know, I'm letting it just go through me. You know, I'm like, let me challenge the idea that like these spaces have to be static or rigor, like, oh, the institutionalized, because I'm definitely feeling really emotional hearing all of that. I couldn't resonate more. I'm holding space for some grief support today after this, and I did a really beautiful garden harvest and like this extravagant menu, and I went on my iPad and did the whole menu. I'm like, Nikki's dinner at Nikki's, you know, and you know, I was like, am I being silly, you know? But I'm like, no, we're celebrating abundance of life. And just because someone has transitioned, like we want to honor the abundance that they offered us in their time. So feel really connected to so many of the words. Ooh, y'all, this is beautiful. I'm like, yes, thank you. I want to bring it over to Tanya, who I know we're going to sort of wrap this all up, and then we'll move into our sort of just more free-flowing conversation. Like I said, I feel like there's constellations illuminating, right? There's so much difference, there's space, and then there's so much connectedness and connective tissue. So pass it over to you, Tanya.
I'm muted. Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. Jassy, Remy, and Andrew, Nikki, Shay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the infinite wisdom that you have shared already today. I feel so inspired by the work that each of you are doing, and I am feeling very shy and grateful to be considered. To be worthy to share space with each of you. My name is Tanya Aganaba. I use the pronouns they and them. Like some of my fellow panelists, I am joining from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, but I'm not from here. My family is originally from what's known today as Nigeria and Zimbabwe, and I've lived in so-called Canada since I was in my early teens. That's all the data that you're going to get. You don't need to do any mathematics to try and figure out how old I am. Okay. But yes, so now I live in so-called Vancouver, and I am very proud to be organizing with the Defund 604 Network, which is an abolitionist organizing collective that is, as we mentioned at the beginning, organizing principled struggle together to do what we can to defund, dismantle, decarcerate, abolish the police in all forms. Yes, the Vancouver Police Department is garbage, but we're talking about policing in all of its form, right? Private security. We're talking about the DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We're talking about MCFD, who I'm not sure what the Child Protective Services, I guess, would be the equivalent in so-called America. But all of the different levels and insidious versions of policing that we are living with and that we are being oppressed by on a day-to-day. So that's what the Defund 604 network is dedicated to. I shared some really beautiful resources, but I did not make a PowerPoint. So I'll just describe to you what we do, and you can go to the Resilient Cartographies website to check out all of the work that we've all created, and you all can see what we're doing. But within the Defund 604 network, we started our organizing together early in the pandemic. Each of us was obviously disgusted by the televised murder of multiple people, also especially George Floyd. But what we were noticing in so-called Canada is that Canadians are whack as hell and would respond to this violence by saying, that's not a problem that we have here in so-called Canada. We don't have that issue with the Vancouver Police Department, when we know from our lived experience here on Turtle Island that that is not true. The police are murderers in all forms and capacities, no matter the jurisdiction that they are operating on. So when the Defund 604 network came together in the early pandemic, we were having conversations about why people were responding to our experience of the police in so-called Canada in a different way. And it was really coming down to what Shay was talking about, not having access or an understanding of the reams of data that's available to us that actually highlights and specifically talks about, A, the amount of police murder that happens in so-called Canada, B, the drastic overspending on police in comparison with every other social or community service that exists in our community. So we started talking about, like, first of all, what is it that we want to see happen as the Defund 604 network? And we decided that we are fully towards decriminalizing survival, right? Because where we're at right now is, if you are poor, if you're disabled, if you're mad, if you're queer, if you're Black, if you're any other kind of racialized, if you're Indigenous, especially because this is so-called Canada and so-called America, you are at astronomical risk in comparison to white people of police violence, brutality, maiming, attack by a police dog, you name it, right? So we were like, okay, if we can advocate and organize around the decriminalization of survival and poverty, that's a number one for us. Number two, we want to defund and redirect funding from the police back into our community services. I know that language, defund the police, is extremely triggering for mostly white folks. I don't know. But it's triggering to some people. Me, I hear defund the police and I'm like, yeah! Other people hear it and they're like, no! And I'm like, maybe because your dad's a police officer? I don't know, whatever. But yeah, so defunding and redirecting. For those who are triggered by that language, really it's reinvesting in our communities, reinvesting in the things that we've been stripping away systematically for decades, right? And then the final thing, which is arguably the biggest thing, is change culture. I'm always reminded about two quotes. The first quote is by Ruth Wilson Gilmore, absolute babe, badass, educator, geographer, just all around beautiful human being. I believe, if I'm not incorrect, they started Creative Interventions, which is like huge. They always say, for abolition to work, you have to change one thing, which is everything. So asking for us to change culture, yeah, it's a big ask, but I think Shay mentioned so many beautiful things that actually result in the changing of culture. Eating together, growing food together, learning how to provide that safety that we're all looking for, because we've, like I said, been systematically taught to believe that we have no role to play in community safety, that role exclusively belongs to the police. But I'm pretty sure that we all know different, right? when I'm in a bind, as a Black person who is mad, has a disability, who's a drug user, I'm not calling the cops, right? I'm gonna call somebody that I use with, because that person I can trust. And really, when we're talking about changing culture, what we're talking about is empowering people to understand and recognize that they have a larger role to play in their community. And that's such a beautiful thing, actually. It's not scary to me to think about caring for my community more. That's rad. I think that's exciting, but lots of people don't want to do that because they're filthy capitalists. I'm just saying. So we have those three things that we're focused on: decriminalizing survival and poverty, defunding and redirecting funds from the police back into our communities, and then the third and final is changing culture. And as we started having these conversations and this principled struggle between our organizing collective about what it is that we want, how we want to move forward, we started thinking of ourselves as the mycelial network. Now, if any of you understand the power of magic mushrooms, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know anything about magic mushrooms, all I'm telling you is that, okay, I apologize because it's got a lot of white people in it, but the movie is called Fantastic Fungi, and it will wise you up to what I'm getting at here. And the idea is that underneath the surface of the topsoil is a network, a mycelial network that is intricately connected, cannot be destroyed unless you are trying to dig for oil and stuff like that. You'll destroy it. But this network sends messages around the world, sends healing around the world. It heals the ecosystem when it's been destroyed. For example, when people are like, oh no, there's been an oil spill. A lot of the conversation that folks are having today about oil spills is like, how can we use mushrooms to heal this? How can we use mushrooms to eat plastic? Like, the mycelial network is so powerful and unseen. And that's kind of the vibe that we wanted to create with the network. All of these underground entities that are reaching out to each other, providing mutual aid, that are creating free fridges, that are dropping food off at an old auntie's house, or that are giving people rides from here to there, or that are buying bulk masks, which is absolutely disgusting that we have to do any kind of activity like this in a pandemic. Buying bulk masks and giving them out to the community, buying extra tests, providing them to the community. These everyday acts of abolition are what makes up the mycelial network. So when you go to Resilient Cartographies and you see these beautiful images of the mycelial network and all of our, the Defund 604 network's focus points and the things that we're arguing for and demanding of our local, provincial, and federal government, you'll see that. You'll see the mycelial network, our demands. You'll see the water table, which kind of shows you all of the things that nourish the work that we're doing. That's land back. That's Black people. That's Indigenous people. That's everyone who's racialized. That's people with disabilities. That's mad folks. That is our water table. That's where we get our nourishment. And as we move through the mycelial network, we come to the roots of the tree. And those three roots are decriminalized survival, defund and redirect, and the third and final is change culture. As you move up the tree, you come to the top where you see the beauty of the tree, all of the beautiful green leaves. And the green leaves in the image that I've shared with you right now are not populated because the work is ongoing. We are still developing those alternatives to carcerality. But what I can say is that through this beautiful journey that we've been able to go on together throughout the pandemic, we have worked together to create those alternatives. And the result has been so beautiful. For example, for this 5 days that has just passed, today is the last day. I'm not there because I have COVID, so I decided that it would not be right for me to show up in person at an art show. I don't know. People are doing weird things. You all are laughing, but people are doing strange things. So for the last 5 days, we held an art show that was called Justice for Jared. And it was organized in collaboration and solidarity with Laura Holland, who is the mother of Jared Lee Lowndes, who was killed by the police in Campbell River, July 8th, 2021. He was shot nine times on a 17-year-old warrant, which is disgusting. And one thing that I've had a lot of conversations with Laura, and the Defund 604 network has as well. And one thing that they kept saying to us is, I want to do something beautiful. And Nikki, you were just talking about this. Like, I feel like I was doing too much. Like, no. People need beauty. People need joy. People need art, creativity. And I'm finding that the only way to actually counter control and coerciveness from the government is to enhance creativity and to provide as many opportunities as possible for people to create together, for people to share the works that they've created. And yeah, that's it. I'm going to stop there. I love you so much, Shay. I have a professional crush on you. I'm just putting it out there. You too, Remy and Andrew. No diss. You too, Nikki. Thank you so much for having me.
Back at you.
Yes, so much love, so much love. This has been so lovely. I feel like my jaw's a little responding, like smiling so much. And I just wanted to share with y'all really briefly, like, art, culture, meaning making is one of kind of like the anchors of like all of what we do in sort of different manifestations. But it makes me think of like different activities I do with young people, where I'll ask, like, we have this really beautiful exercise where it's like, if we could take out the $53 million of Miami School Police Department, which, by the way, is the largest student police department in all of the United States, what would you do? Like, what do y'all want to do with that money? And, these are young people that, to the system, Black and brown youth who go to schools in the hood, are like, they don't know. They don't have the capacity to make decisions. They don't know. But very quickly had such, they were like, decolonized classrooms. We want gardens. We want circles. We want natural lighting. We want like beautiful architecture. And a friend of mine and I just made it into visual notes, and I'm going to share it later on, but it's constantly regrounds me on this idea of like the power of imagination, of reclaiming pleasure, reclaiming sensuality, reclaiming our sensory experience that, trauma steals from us, the state steals from us. And I want to kind of open it now a little bit, just kind of for all of us to just kind of get into discussion a little bit more free flowing. And I wanted to hear, I mean, we're all talking about like culture, art making, I think abolition, sort of international solidarity across racial groups, dismantling of oppressive systems that we just do not want to just step right back into, just because the New York Times and the elite say that COVID is over and like everyone get to work and do the thing. But I am curious to hear from you all. I think in this sort of, I think of Mariam Kaba's phrase of hope is a discipline. And as an organizer, as an artist, and as, I think, quite frankly, a worker, anyone surviving these times, like, it really feels like you have to have profound rigor and profound discipline to access that sort of hope and that sort of joy of like, this is worth it and something different is possible. That I'm curious, it could either be more personally or sort of in terms of practice or collectively, like, what are some helpful practices you all have been up to and experimenting with?
Well, I think one of the ones that really ties into the embroidery is the Million Artist Movement. We were also founders of co-founders of the Million Artist Movement. It continues to thrive with new leadership in an amazing way. But there's, ever since it started years ago, over 10, 11 years ago, just making quilt patches is, and they've, anybody can kind of make a patch, and in some neighborhoods, especially if it's a pop-up or it's if there's an action, set out a table and there's patches of cloth, and even if there's not like paint or kids can like use markers or fabric marker, et cetera. It can be very simple, but I think the idea of like utilizing patches and knowing that they're going to contribute to this large quilt that has a universal message, but everybody kind of, made their own square is really powerful. My kids got into giving me bath bombs, those bath bombs. Yeah. And it's such a funny thing now. Like, it's a thing in the house. Because I realized that I hadn't taken a bath in a long time, because it's especially when you're dealing with a lot. And a lot of us weren't sleeping. We're just out and, you're just trying to get materials to people and make sure that, people that are dealing with food insecurity, et cetera, are fed. But literally, I was like, oh my God, this forces me to take a bath so I can see that bath. And there's like a little gift in it. So we started regifting other people with these little, and they're not that expensive. But so it's more of like, this is a luxury, but also take this moment for yourself. So I'll throw those two into the pot.
The way I love a good bath bomb, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. It feels like, I'm like, oh, I don't have time to fill up the tub. Like, I don't have time for that. So I really appreciate that practice and offering.
I have one that I would like to share. I work with a lot of youth as well, and work with folks from a bunch of different backgrounds, right? So it's always really crucial to me that whatever we're doing is as low barrier as possible so that everyone can participate. And there's something that I've been doing called a planetary jam, which is basically you just tell people to draw a circle, and then that's your planet. On your planet, all things are possible. If you want to send a message to outer space to tell them not to bother, you can do that. If you want to cover your planet with lush greenery, I'm thinking about that poem that you shared, Shay. Like, that's a planet that I'm trying to live on, So that's one that I really love to do. And the reason that I love that exercise so much is just like you were mentioning, Shay, that like there's a finished product at the end of it, which is a quilt. We've used those circle activities to create buttons. And it's really beautiful for folks to be like, oh my God, I have a button that I made. And we have a button machine that we have access to. So it's very simple to kind of get that going. So if you have a space that has a photocopier and you have paper and you have a circle that you can draw around, then you have a button making project that's super easy for folks to get involved in, and also can potentially make you some fundraising money at the end.
Yeah, all those are really good. And I think we kind of have a common thread here of small movements that are happening on the community or neighborhood level. And that's something that for me has been really important as well. I've been working in Vancouver. We have local open access fridge, which is on the corner of Hastings and Garden. And it has free fresh food for anyone in the community, 24 hours a day. There's no food policing. We're just connecting community members with free food. And, that seems at the surface level like it may, seem like something so small. But when you go to drop off food at the fridge and you see 5 people waiting in line who may have not had access to fresh food, or you yourself just need some food because you're hungry and walking around, that's been a really meaningful project that has given me some hope during this time. And we just go and clean it, sanitize it, make sure there's no rotten food or anything, but it's given me some hope in the community. You start to see some local businesses actually dropping off food, and the fact that it's putting something meaningful on the plates of people in the community who may have had to miss a meal, it just means the world being able to do it. And it has given me a lot of hope. Just generally, we go to farmers markets and people are giving the fresh food that they've grown in their farm and connecting it to community members. So I think that that's a really beautiful way where we're seeing mutual aid that has no strings attached. And for me, that's really important because you don't need to qualify for something. We're a community. It should be given freely and willingly. So that's been very inspiring during kind of a dark time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, some comrades of ours have a community fridge right in front of where our organization's at. And yeah, it's like every morning. It's also next to a bus stop. So Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's, you know, kind of like situated in like your stereotypical food desert, right? And like working class Black and brown neighborhood. You have your Popeyes, Burger King, and yeah, that's what you got going on. And then you have the community fridge with like a bunch of fresh produce, and painters have done really beautiful murals around it. And I love this piece, this like regrounding on the no strings attached piece, right? And the fact that here we are 2 years into the start of the pandemic and that folks are continuing to hold it, right? Because I think that was one of my fears, seeing kind of the energy and the momentum of like summer of 2020. And I'm like, amazing, welcome. Like, yes, we want all of y'all. And then of course, seeing some of that fizzle out, of course, seeing some of like the mainstream media kind of want to like insert itself in unuseful ways into that rhetoric and into like that work. And then I'm reminded of like, oh yeah, and community has shifted and pivoted to actually ensure that that garden is continued to be nurtured, literally, figuratively, and in between. I'm also curious to just learn and hear a little bit about what are some of the revelations or learnings that y'all are uncovering and unraveling about yourselves and your work through this COVID time. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. I guess that's a big one.
I think for me is it's also lies in the space that has been challenging, which is how do you really show up fully, but also how do you preserve some part of yourself for yourself? And you know, there's a national conversation around wellness, right? But I think when you really start to dig into it, there's so many artists that don't have health care. There's so many artists that you know, are living check to check. And so I don't know, it's just there's a divide in terms of like, yeah, how do we, where do we have the space to actually step away and take a personal retreat and restore ourselves? Because if we're not well, we can't do the work well. um so it's not necessarily a space that has all the answers yet, but it's a real thing, you know. And I'm a mother, I still have young kids, youngish kids. So it's something that I'm navigating. I don't think I'm struggling with it as much as I was before, but before it was just like, just get the work done, just we'll figure it out, you know, just run. But then it's like coming home late, carrying people in the house, and it's like, this is not sustainable. But at the same time, like, I know my grandmother had to do it, you know, but how many years did she do it until she passed away? No. So how do you do it? And I don't know. It's just I'm dealing with that as a really big question, and just kind of reassessing. Yeah, when do we step out of the way, or when do we move over? You know, and when do we, you know, sometimes prematurely trying to pass a baton, and it's like nobody's grabbing it because it's not time for them yet. Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, more of a challenge, but a reality too.
I'll go first, and then you can kind of come in. I think one of the biggest things that I've been learning, and still, you know, it's constantly moving, but it's how do I create and maintain safe spaces for everyone, and how do I use my position to uplift and support the voices of others, and not being the one in the room who's talking first, not being the one in the room who's trying to put my ideas forward first, but really learning and being there to support others when they face opposition from those in power and those who want to squash these ideas that may be considered too revolutionary or too difficult or too easy. You know, I see myself there as a role in saying, well, wait, you know, there's a reason for this, and we have to center that person and their experience and make sure that that's the case. So I think that that's been a really amazing learning opportunity. And this is another example of that, where I'm learning from everyone here more ideas, and it's helping me grow as a person, but hopefully be better for my community as well.
Yeah, I think that that's actually absolutely true. Like how the importance of just listening and learning from people, not always needing to be the one to speak in any like certain instance or anything. And I think what like the time of COVID and with all the change that's come from it, as a filmmaker, from working in so much fiction, it's really easy to just believe that you can paint a picture only in these imaginary worlds and that, oh, something crazy like this couldn't really come up and just change how we function and do everything. But it can. This is the real world. Like it's just the reality. So it really helped put into perspective that like maybe some of these things that are deemed too out of here or too far out that they couldn't ever be a possibility, maybe they can. Maybe it just starts with like trying to make that a reality in your own community. And then hopefully, as opposed to trying to knock over, if we're playing Jenga, as opposed to trying to knock over the whole thing, kind of pulling the bricks out of the bottom and then, see where it goes from there. So, yeah.
Yo, I love you both. Thank you so much for saying that, and I agree with everything you said. I the thing that I have learned is that I'm so much smarter than I thought I was. Right? I did not. If you would have talked to me before the pandemic and said, "Hey, you're going to have to learn a bunch about fiscal policy. You're going to have to learn a bunch about the provincial government and the Police Act. You're going to have to show up to meetings with the Parliamentary Secretary of Racism in the province of British Columbia and actually like say a word or two." I had no belief in myself in that regard. But what I've learned throughout the course of the pandemic is that given enough time, you can learn absolutely anything. And if you have passion, if you have resolve, if you have people who are in your corner, I have to say that I'm blessed as hell. I have beautiful partners that love me. I have a beautiful baby that loves me sometimes. They're turning 17 next month, so most of the time they're like, yeah. But like I'm privileged in that regard. I have people around me who are holding me up, allowing me to learn. And I'm grateful for them for giving me the space and time to do that. But for anybody who's watching this and they're like, I don't know, policy, like that was me 2 and a bit years ago. Policy, what? Now I am sitting down to write policy with the Defund 604 Network and other organizations. So if there's one thing that I can say that I've taken away from this pandemic is that I can learn anything. And if I haven't learned your name, it's because I don't like you.
Yes, yes. yes.
We could go on and on. I just love this panel. I just love it.
I know. Welcome back, David and Alejandra.
Thank you guys so much. That was so fantastic. Yeah, I think just one big reflection that I could that comes to mind. Alejandra and I, this symposium, we started organizing. Oh my goodness, almost 2 years ago, and it started with a panel series that we did called "Struggles in Places," and a quote is coming to mind, and Kodyo Eshon from the Otolith group said this in the first panel, that the experience of going through the pandemic is an interscalar experience. And that just kept coming through in this panel when, we opened it thinking about all these big social movements and transformations that have happened and things that have been pushed. But those moments of revolution also come in the day-to-day. And it really came through and really interrogating also what is considered productive in a sort of neoliberal sense has been a really big theme. And so thank you guys so much. It was incredibly powerful. I can't believe we got all of you in the same virtual space together. We were remarking in the background that it was just such a wonderful energy. And, this vision I just wanted to quickly mention, because my heart is so full, because Alejandra and I, when we put together this symposium, we're thinking exactly this kind of bringing together people in this space to have this conversation. So thank you so much.
Yes, it's so hard. It's so hard to say something about it because this was an intensive panel. But I want just highlight one thing, and maybe it's this force of creation in pandemic times, and as you show us, also this need of feed us, feed the memory, feed our dreams too, And to do that, reclaim our rituals, our herbs, our medicine, our cooking, our imagination. Um, and we have to reclaim, because that has been through different generations to arrive here to us. And that is a way to not just deal with this hard time, but also to transform the oppressions that go beyond these hard times. And I just have to say thank you so much, because all of you be possible this great conversation, from different parts of the world, from different backgrounds, and was really, really, really great. And you feed us in the best way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So we just want to remind everyone watching that you can visit resilientcartographies.com, where you can find all of the gestures from all of our wonderful panelists, and also all of the other contributions from the other panels today. And Elul, my colleague, is just dropping the link into the chat right now. Also, we have the final panel in 25 minutes. It's in a different link. Elul is also going to drop that link into the chat right now. So we're going to take a 25-minute break. And then, yeah, we'll see you all at the final panel. Thank you.